The wheat told us before the house did. Dead stalks, standing gold gray and stiff as wire, not a one of them cut, not a one of them fallen, an entire field of grain left to die on its feet, 40 acres if it was an inch, and the wind moving through it made a sound I have not forgotten since, a dry whispering, like the land itself was talking low so as not to wake something. We came on it walking, my brother and I, a little past noon on Tuesday the 8th of September, 1885, boots gone thin from 300 miles of Dakota territory, packs down to the last of the cornmeal, and a half-pound of salt pork between us. There was no wind that morning worth mentioning, just heat, still holding on, though the season was turning, and a sky so wide and so empty it made a man feel like a mark on a page nobody had bothered to finish writing. The house sat low, sod-walled, roofed in the same dead grass that grew around it, so that from 50 yards you might have walked past it entire. A door hung open on a leather hinge. No stock in the pen, no dog, no smoke, no sound but that wheat talking to itself. My brother went in first, the way he always does, on the theory, never spoken, just understood between us in 11 years of this life, that if something in a house means to hurt a man, better it spend itself on the older of us. He stood in the doorway a long moment, and then he said my name, quiet, in a voice I knew meant, "Come look at this," not "come help me." There was a table inside, set for 4, tin plates, a little corn mush gone hard and gray in the bowls, a coffee pot cold as the dirt floor beneath it, a child's shoe by the hearth, the leather curled up at the toe from drying too fast, too long ago, nothing broken, nothing taken, a home that a family had walked out of mid-meal and simply not returned to, and from the dust laid soft and even over every surface, not returned to in a good while. We had been 3 weeks out of a claims office in Bismarck with $40 between us, and a hunger for ground that was ours and nobody else's, following rumor of open land along a stretch of creek bottom that a land agent had marked abandoned on his map with nothing more than a small penciled X and the word vacated, vacated. That was the word he'd used, standing behind his counter in his clean shirt, and I remember thinking it a strange, bloodless sort of word for whatever this was. My brother set his pack down easy against the wall, like a man being careful not to wake a sleeper, and looked at me across that table still laid for a family that wasn't coming back to eat from it. "Well," he said, "somebody's got to bring this wheat in before frost." I did not answer him right away. I was looking at the 4th plate, and wondering who hadn't sat down to eat it. We had $34 left between us by then, counted twice the night before on a flat rock beside the fire, and my brother had said the number out loud like a man confessing a sin, low and even, so I'd know exactly how thin the ice was under us. $34, 2 horses gone lame, and traded off weeks back for 1 mule that pulled steady but slow, a Sharps rifle with 11 cartridges left for it, a hand axe with the handle cracked and bound in rawhide, and whatever we carried on our backs. That was the whole of what we owned in the world, plus now, it seemed, whatever this place would let us have. He walked the room slow, the way he did when he was deciding something without wanting to say so yet, running a thumb along the sod wall where it had cracked near the window frame, testing the give of it. "Land agent said vacated," he said again, mostly to himself. "Man doesn't write vacated on his map unless the county's already washed its hands of it." I understood him well enough. Under the abandonment clause, ground left untended and unclaimed past a season could be taken up fresh by whoever was willing to work it and file the paper. We had heard of it done before. In Bismarck, men trading rumors of good bottomland gone begging because some family had pulled up stakes and nobody troubled themselves to chase the record. So we went to counting, the way you'd count anything you meant to keep. A plow standing abandoned out past the sod barn, half into a furrow that had never been finished, the ground grown hard and cracked around the blade like scar tissue, a hand scythe hung on a nail by the door, its edge gone to rust-freckled dullness but the wood handle sound, a crosscut saw missing 1 handle, 2 milk pails, dented, a washtub with a hole punched clean through the bottom, as if someone had done it on purpose rather than let it be used again, 9 chickens still scratching wild in the yard, gone half feral, which told us more plainly than anything that whoever left here hadn't meant to be gone long, or hadn't meant to go at all. The sod walls themselves were sound enough, thick and cool, laid by someone who'd known what they were doing, though the roof beam over the north corner had begun to sag under old rain and would need shoring before snow. My brother put his hand flat against that beam and looked at it a long moment, the way he'd look at a horse's leg before deciding whether it would carry a man another 50 miles. "We'll winter here," he said finally, not asking me, though he waited anyway, the way he always did, for me to say it back to him before it became a thing, decided between us, instead of just a thing he'd said. "We'll winter here," I said back to him, and that was that. We spent the better part of a week, Wednesday to the following Tuesday by my counting, working from first gray light until we couldn't tell the sickle from our own hands. The wheat had stood so long dead that half of it shattered at the touch, kernels scattering into dirt that would never see them again, but we saved what we could into 2 grain sacks, and a third we patched together from a torn horse blanket. My brother said 30 bushels, maybe less, once the chaff was out, and that would have to answer for both flour and seed if we meant to plant come spring. The work was hard, in a way mountain work never was. No shade anywhere, the sun flat and endless, sweat drying to salt on our shirts before noon. The roof took 2 more days after that. We cut new sod from a low spot near the creek where the grass grew thick and root-bound, hauled it up in the wheelbarrow we found rusting behind the spring house, and laid it over the sagging beam my brother had shored with a length of cottonwood trunk we felled and squared ourselves. It wasn't fine work. It would hold. It was on the 4th evening, while I was setting the table to rights, an ordinary thing, the kind of chore a man does without thinking, that I noticed there were 4 tin cups on the shelf above the stove, arranged in a neat row like someone had washed and set them there with care, not urgency. 4 cups. The land office ledger, the one the clerk in Deadwood had let us copy from, listed the family at 5 souls, a man, his wife, and 3 children. I stood there counting the cups twice before I said anything to my brother, and even then I didn't say much, only, "Look at this." He looked, and didn't say anything either, which was its own kind of answer. The next morning I found the shoe. It was small, a child's, no bigger than my palm, half buried by the doorstep where it must have fallen, or been kicked, or set down and forgotten, the leather gone stiff and pale as bone. 1 shoe, no mate anywhere I could find, though I looked under the bed frame, and behind the trunk, and in the crawl space beneath the floorboards, where a family might keep root vegetables, or, I thought uneasily, other things they didn't want found. I didn't tell my brother right away. I held it a while first, turning it over, feeling how light it was, how a thing so small could sit so heavy in a man's hand. When I did show him, he took it without a word and set it on the shelf beside the 4 cups, like he was building something out of pieces he didn't yet have a name for, and neither of us said what we were both beginning to think, that the county's tidy word, peaceably, sat wrong against a shoe with no mate and a cup too many left behind. We put the shoe on the shelf and went back to work, because that was the only thing either of us knew how to do with a thing we couldn't answer. There was a dugout pantry cut into the north wall of the cellar, cool and dry, meant for root vegetables and jarred preserves, and my brother said we'd need it filled before the first hard freeze, so on Thursday, the 8th of October, we cleared it out. Old crocks gone to dust inside, a barrel of nails rusted solid into one shape, a rat's nest we burned outside rather than deal with by hand. It was slow work in low light. The dugout had 1 small vent to the surface, and even at midday we worked mostly by lamp, which made everything feel closer than it was, the walls pressing in a little, the smell of earth and old grain thick enough to taste. I was running my hand along the back wall, checking for damp the way our father taught us, before either of us could shave, when I felt a board give under my palm that shouldn't have given at all. The others were packed earth. This one had a seam. I didn't call out right away. I worked my knife into the seam first, careful, the way you'd open something that might not want opening, and the board came free with a sound like a held breath finally let go. Behind it was a space no bigger than a bread box, dug clean and square, and inside that space sat a flour tin, the kind you'd buy from a mercantile in Yankton or Sioux Falls for maybe 30 cents, its paint worn to bare metal at the corners. I called my brother down then. He came fast, the way he did when my voice changed pitch without my meaning it to, and we sat on the dirt floor together, and I worked the lid loose. It wasn't flour inside. It was a book, wrapped once in a scrap of oilcloth gone brittle at the folds, and when I lifted it out I knew before I opened it what kind of book it was by the weight and the leather and the way the spine had been mended once with waxed thread. A family Bible. Inside the front cover, in a strong, even hand, someone had ruled out a register. Births. Marriages. Man. Deaths. And filled in 4 children's names beneath the parents, dates alongside each in the same steady ink. I read them once, twice, my brother's shoulder against mine in that close dark space, before I saw what he'd already seen. One name had a line drawn through it. Not the strong, even hand that wrote the rest. A different one, thinner, shakier, pressed hard enough in places to nearly tear the page, like whoever held the pen that day was fighting the paper as much as writing on it. Neither of us said the name out loud. We just sat there with the lamp burning low and the tin open between us, and somewhere above our heads the wind moved over dead wheat that no one living had planted. Gideon turned the pages slow, the way a man turns pages when he's afraid of what tearing one might cost him. The paper had gone the color of weak tea, and it cracked faintly at the fold each time, a sound like a knuckle popping far off. He was hunting for something, though neither of us had said what, and I let him hunt because his eyes were younger and better in poor light than mine. He stopped somewhere past the middle. A folded square of paper had been pressed flat between 2 pages of the Book of Ruth, and it came loose into his palm like it had been waiting there a long while to be found by someone other than the hand that put it in. He unfolded it careful. The ink was the same thin, hurried hand that had drawn the line through the name in the register, and I felt something go tight in my chest seeing it again, that same fighting the paper look to the letters. June, 1885, he read, and then he went quiet a moment, moving his lips over the lines before he trusted his voice with them. They came on a Tuesday afternoon, he read, black as a cloud come down to earth, and by the time I got the children under the wagon, canvas the wheat was gone to the stem, 40 acres stripped bare before supper. I have seen hail take a crop and drought starve one slow, but I have never seen a field die in an hour like a man dies of a gunshot. He stopped there and looked up at me, like he wanted permission to keep going, though I don't know what I could have given him that the letter itself wasn't already taking. He read on. The hand described selling 2 mules for 1/3 of their worth, described flour rationed by the cup, described a neighbor 3 miles off who wouldn't lend for fear of never getting it back. And then, near the bottom of the page, the writing changed again. Not in hand, but in weight. The pen pressed so hard in places the paper had gone thin and near torn through. Ruth is sick with the fever 3 days now, Gideon read, and his voice dropped down low enough I had to lean to catch the rest. She is 6 years old and will not take water. I have prayed over her the way my mother prayed over me, and it has done. He stopped. That's it, he said. It just stops. He turned the paper over, held it up toward the lamp like the rest of the sentence might be hiding on the back of it, some fainter mark, some second line. There was nothing. The letter ended mid-word, mid-thought, the ink trailing off like the hand behind it had simply lifted the pen and never brought it back down. Outside, the wind had picked up, working at the sod roof the way it worked at everything out here, patient and without malice, and I sat there with the register open on my knees and that torn-off sentence between us, thinking of the line drawn through a name, thinking of a small grave I hadn't found yet, but somehow already knew was waiting. We ate that night without much appetite, the beans gone cold in the pot before either of us thought to warm them again, and I remember the sound the wind made against the west wall, a low, steady push, like something leaning its shoulder into the sod and waiting to see if it would give. Gideon set the Bible down between the 2 bowls, not open, just there, the way you'd set down a thing you didn't want in your hands anymore, but couldn't put across the room either. Could be nothing, he said. Could be she pulled through. Children get fevers out here every summer. My mother used to say half the babies in Ohio County were carried through some fever or another before they turned 7. Could be, I said. Man stops writing mid-sentence because his hand's tired, or the lamp oil's low, or somebody calls him out to the stock. Could be. He didn't look convinced saying it, and I wasn't convinced hearing it, but there's a kind of talk two men do at a table when neither one wants to say the plain thing out loud, so we kept turning it over, gentle, like handling a hot skillet with a rag that wasn't quite thick enough. He allowed that the ink might have simply run dry. I allowed that folks don't always finish a letter they mean to finish, that maybe it got tucked in the Bible half-written and forgotten, the way half the world's business gets left undone. We built it up that way, sentence by sentence, until it stood on its own 2 legs well enough that we could both agree to stand up from the table. But before he blew out the lamp, Gideon said the other thing, the thing he'd been carrying since the register, quieter than the rest. That name, he said. Struck through like that, a man doesn't cross out his own daughter's name in the family Bible unless something in him wanted her gone from the page before she was gone from anywhere else. He didn't say more than that, and I didn't ask him to, because there wasn't a comfortable answer waiting on either side of it. We went back out after, into the last gray hour of light, and banked sod against the north wall, where the frost had already started working its fingers into the old chinking. It was slow work, packing wet earth against wet earth, and my hands went numb past the wrist before we'd covered 10 feet of wall. Gideon worked beside me without talking, the way he does when something's sitting on him, and I let him be, because I'd learned by then that my brother turns a thing over longest in silence and comes back to it in his own hour, on his own ground, usually when I've stopped expecting him to at all. Morning came in hard and white, the kind of frost that makes the grass sound like glass when you walk it, and by the time the sun cleared the sod roof we'd already eaten and were standing at the north wall of the cellar with the 2 shovels we owned, deciding where to open the ground. The cellar as it stood was maybe 8 feet by 6, dug the first year the family broke this claim, and it wouldn't hold what we'd need through a Dakota winter. Not with the seed corn we'd have to save back, not with the salt pork we'd traded $4 and a whetstone for at the Mercantile in Sturgis, not with anything to spare if February turned mean. Gideon paced it off, said we'd want 6 feet more running north, and I didn't argue, because he'd wintered rougher ground than this and I hadn't. We started at the corner where the old sod bricks gave way to plain earth, cutting through the frost crust first with the axe before the shovels could do any good. The ground underneath was better than I expected, dark and heavy, no rock to speak of the way there sometimes is on the higher benches, and we made steady progress through the morning, trading off every 20 minutes so neither of us burned out our shoulders. By midday we'd gone down near 2 feet along the whole width, and Gideon had started talking again, easier than the night before, telling me about a root cellar he'd seen once outside Cheyenne that a man had lined clean through with fieldstone, floor and walls both, so the frost never touched what he kept in it. That was when my shovel caught on something that wasn't dirt. It came in wrong. Not the give of soil, not the shock of buried rock the way you'd hit a stone that had always been there, working its way up through freeze and thaw same as every other stone on this prairie. This had a flatness to it, a set edge, like it had been placed rather than left. I scraped the loose earth back with the blade, and then with my hands, and Gideon stopped talking and crouched down beside me, without my having to say anything. It was a single fieldstone, maybe 14 inches across, flat on its upper face, buried a foot down, and set almost level, like somebody had taken care to lay it so it wouldn't tip with the frost heave. It didn't belong to any foundation line I could make out. It wasn't near enough to the original cellar wall to be part of its footing, and it wasn't deep enough to be doing any real work holding anything up. Gideon looked at it a long moment, then looked past me toward the low grass rise a few yards off, the one neither of us had ever had cause to walk to. "Isaac," he said, "get the small shovel." I fetched the small shovel from where it leaned against the wagon wheel, and by the time I got back, Gideon had already cleared another 2 inches of dirt off the stone's face with the flat of his hand, working slow and careful the way you'd clean a wound rather than dig a hole. The wind had dropped some, the way it does in the last hour before dusk on the prairie, like the whole country was holding still to watch what we were doing. He took the shovel from me, but didn't use the blade of it. He turned it around and used the handle end, scraping rather than cutting, and I got down on my knees across from him and did the same with my hands, brushing the loose soil off in small handfuls. Neither of us said anything. The only sound was the scrape of wood against stone, and somewhere off to the north, a meadowlark going on like it was any other evening. The stone came clear a little at a time, and then all at once we saw it. Cut into the face, not deep, not by any stonecutter's tool, but by something plainer, a chisel maybe, or the corner of a hard file, were 7 characters, a date, June 19th, 1885. Gideon's hand stopped moving. I looked at the numbers a long moment before the shape of what they meant settled into me the way cold settles into a wet boot, slow and then complete. 4 months back, deep summer, the locust weeks, if the letter in the Bible had its dates right, though the letter never named a day so exact as this one. Below the stone, the ground kept the memory of having been opened once already. You could see it once you knew to look, a rectangle maybe 3 feet by 18 inches, the color of the soil just faintly different from what surrounded it, settled but not settled the same, the grass over it thinner and paler than the grass a foot away in any direction. Gideon set the shovel down in the grass beside him, not driving it into the ground, just laying it there like he didn't trust himself to hold a tool over that spot. "That ain't cellar digging," he said. I didn't answer him. I was doing the arithmetic a man does without wanting to, the size of that rectangle, the smallness of it, what kind of body it would take to need a hole no bigger than a feed trough. Neither of us moved to dig further. It wasn't decided between us in words, just understood the way most things between us were understood, that whatever this ground was holding, it wasn't ours to open with a shovel on a Tuesday evening because we'd needed more root cellar space. Gideon reached out and set his palm flat against the stone, the way a man might touch a horse's neck to gentle it, and left it there. Above us, the sky had gone the color of a bruise healing, purple going to yellow at the rim, and the meadowlark had stopped its calling, and the wind came back up soft across the grass, like it had only been waiting for us to finish. We went back to the letter that night, because there was nothing else to do with what we'd seen that wouldn't have meant lying to ourselves. I laid the pages flat on the table where the family had once eaten, and Gideon set the Bible beside them, open to the page with the names, and we went at it the way a man goes at a debt he's finally decided to add up honestly. The letter carried no year, but it named the month, August, and it named the locusts thick enough to strip a field bare in 2 days, and it named a fever that came behind them, like the insects had carried it in on their legs. It stopped mid-sentence, the ink trailing off the way ink does when a hand stops trusting itself. It did not name which child. The Bible told us that. 4 children listed in a father's careful hand, births recorded with the same care a man gives to seed corn, dates, not sentiments. The 4th was a girl, Ruth, born 1879. And beneath her name, a second date, added later, in ink gone browner than the rest, the letters smaller, pressed harder into the page like the man had wanted them to hurt his hand on the way down. No word beside it, just the date. The 11th of August, 1885. Gideon set his finger on it and didn't move it for a long while. Then he reached for the stone we'd carried in off the grass and set beside the lamp, and he held it next to the page, and I watched him do the arithmetic out loud without meaning to. "Same month," he said, "same year." He looked at the crossed line in the letter, the one about a decision made, the one that stopped short of saying what. He didn't write it because he couldn't, not because there wasn't time. I thought of the land office ledger back in the county seat, the clean clerk's hand, the words moved on peacefully, sitting there in black ink, like a fact anybody could trust. I thought about how easy those 3 words were to write, and how hard the 2 words under the lamp had been, the name, the date, and how one lie had covered the other so well that a man riding through, with a deed in his pocket, would never have known there was a 4th child at all, or that she hadn't gone east with the rest of them, hadn't gone anywhere, was lying not 40 feet from where we were standing, under a stone with no name on it. "She didn't leave with them," I said, just to hear it said plain. Gideon didn't answer. He was looking at the door, like he expected someone to come through it and tell him he was wrong. We rode to Deadwood on the second Tuesday of October, 41 miles by the North Trail, and camped once at a dry wash, where the wind came up so hard neither of us slept more than an hour at a stretch. My brother carried the letter wrapped in oilcloth inside his coat the whole way, like it might spoil if it got wet, though the sky stayed clear and cold, and the grass along the trail had already gone the color of an old coin. The land office sat on the same street as the assay office, a low-frame building with a stovepipe leaning off true, and the clerk inside was a narrow man named Prescott who wore sleeve garters and didn't look up from his ledger until Gideon set the letter on the counter beside it. He asked what we wanted, and Gideon asked to see the filing for the quarter section we'd claimed, the one recorded the summer before. Prescott pulled the book down from behind him, licked his thumb, turned pages the way a man turns pages he's turned 1,000 times, and laid it open on the counter between us. July 14th, 1885. The farmer's own hand, or close enough. A signature and a short statement below it, the ink gone brown at the edges. The family had elected to relocate, it said, to relatives in the state of Ohio, and relinquished all claim and improvement to the quarter section described herein. Nothing more. No mention of fever, no mention of a grave, no mention of a fourth child at all, not even in passing, not even as a name crossed out. I read it twice to be sure I wasn't putting something into it that wasn't there. That's all there is, Prescott said, like he'd guessed what we were looking for and wanted to save us the trouble of asking twice. Man came in himself, July, signed it standing right where you are. Gideon didn't say anything for a moment. He was looking at the date at the top of the page, and I could see him doing the same arithmetic I was. July, and the stone under the lamp, the month and year scratched into it, close enough to the same season that there wasn't room left for coincidence. He filed this himself, Gideon said. After. After what? Prescott asked, not unkindly, just a man waiting on paperwork. Neither of us answered him. Gideon folded the letter back into his coat, thanked the clerk, and we walked out into the street, where the wind was still working at that stovepipe, and neither one of us said a word until we'd gone 2 blocks. The horses knew the way back better than we did by then, and I let mine pick the pace while I turned the thing over. 12 miles of empty road gives a man more time to think than he wants sometimes. We could tell it, I said finally. Whole thing, let Deadwood chew on it a week and forget it by first snow. And do what for her? Gideon said. He meant the stone, not the mother, though I understood he meant both. Nothing for her, something for the truth of it. Truth doesn't need an audience. He said it flat, the way he said things he'd already decided, and I knew arguing wouldn't move him an inch, so I didn't try. But I kept at the other side of it anyway, because somebody had to. Can't just let it sit how it is either. Man lied on a public record. That's not a small thing, whatever reason he had for it. I'm not saying leave the lie standing. I'm saying there's a difference between fixing a wrong and making a show of it. We rode another mile without talking. The wind had died down some, and I could hear the wheels of a wagon somewhere off to the north, too far to see, just a sound moving through empty country the way sounds do out there, carrying farther than they have any right to. Amendment, Gideon said, like the word had been sitting behind his teeth the whole ride. Not a story, not a scandal, just the record made right. You go back in, you tell Prescott the family didn't move on peaceful, a child died there, name and date if we can put one to it, and that's the whole of what needs saying. No mention of why he lied. That's his business and his wife's, wherever she's got to. And the grave? The grave gets a marker, a real one, cut stone, not a scratch in a rock somebody's boot could wear, smooth in 20 years. He looked over at me then, first time since we'd left town. Man could bury his shame. Don't mean the mountains got to. It's not a mountain, I said. It's flat as a griddle out here for 100 miles. You know what I mean. I did. We rode on with the sun dropping low enough to throw our shadows out long and thin ahead of the horses. 2 shapes stretched across grass that didn't care one way or the other what we decided, and somewhere behind us the wind kept working that same loose stovepipe, patient as anything, like it had all the time in the world to wait on men to make up their minds. Isaac carried the stone himself, wrapped in a feed sack, across 2 counties on the back of the wagon, And he wouldn't say what he paid the mason in Deadwood, only that it came out of the wheat money we hadn't spent yet. We set it in April, the ground finally soft enough to take a spade without fighting it, and he cut the letters deeper than he needed to, like he wanted them to outlast every one of us. A name we'd found at last, tucked in a second letter, folded smaller than the first, pressed flat between two pages, near the back of that Bible, where a man might hide something he couldn't burn, and couldn't read again either. A date beside it, nothing more. No verse, no claim to grace or grief, just what was true, cut clean into stone, that would still be standing when the sod houses were gone to dust, and the wire fences had rusted through and fallen. By the second week of May, the wheat had come up on both claims at once, green pushing through ground that had been nothing but brown stubble and cold dirt 8 months before, and if you stood at the fence line, you couldn't tell where the old family's field ended and ours began. One long, unbroken run of green, the wind moving through it in slow waves the way it moves through everything out here, patient, indifferent, going on regardless of who planted what or why. The grave sat inside a ring we'd left unplanted on purpose, a bare circle of black earth in the middle of all that green, and Isaac said leave it that way. Don't crowd it, let it breathe. Come July there'll be wildflowers in that ring instead, whatever blows in on its own. That seemed right to both of us. I think about that letter some nights still, the one that never got finished, and about a man walking east with a wife and children, and a lie folded up small enough to carry, without anyone seeing the weight of it. I don't hold it against him. A person does what he can bear to do, and no more, and the land doesn't ask forgiveness of anybody, it just keeps growing over what's put into it, kind and unkind alike. That's the whole of it. What we built with our own 2 hands and nothing else, and what we found, we tried to leave better than lying. If you've got a story like that in your own family, some quiet thing nobody talks about at the table, we'd like to hear it. Put it down below. And if this is the kind of country you don't mind walking through with us, stay a while. There's more ground out there yet, and more of it remembers.